Hey everybody, in today's video, I want to give you some helpful tips regarding your L-1 renewal application. So the L-1 visa, also referred to as the intra-company transferee visa, it's a special visa that allows a foreign company to transfer a certain worker, whether they're a manager, executive, or a specialized knowledge worker, to come work for a related company in the United States. And the two companies need to have a qualifying relationship with each other. Generally, qualifying relationships are parent subsidiary, affiliate companies, or if one company is the branch office of another company. So that's one of the most important requirements of the L-1 visa, is that the foreign company and the US company must have a qualifying relationship with one another. Now, this brings me to my very first tip. You want to be very careful about changing the ownership structure of either the US company or the foreign company at any time after the L-1 application is approved. This is not to say that you cannot change the ownership structure, but you should make sure to consult with your immigration lawyer before making any changes to the ownership structure of either the US company or the foreign company at any time after the L-1 is approved. And the reason for this is that certain changes that you make to the ownership structure of either company can disrupt the qualifying relationship between the two companies. So as we discussed, one of the most important requirements for the L-1 visa is that there must be a qualifying relationship between the foreign company and the US company. And again, those qualifying relationships are either parent subsidiary, branch office, or affiliates. And all of those relationships are based on the ownership structure of both companies. And changes to those ownership structures could disrupt whether a qualifying relationship exists. And that qualifying relationship must be in existence at any time that the L-1 visa beneficiary has their L-1 visa. The qualifying relationship is necessary for the validity of that visa to be in place. And similarly, when somebody is going to renew that visa, that qualifying relationship still must be there in order for that individual, the L-1 visa beneficiary, to be eligible for their renewal. So sometimes it could happen that somebody makes changes to the ownership structure of the company, and it can disrupt and potentially eliminate that qualifying relationship. And the L-1 visa beneficiary goes in for a renewal and there's no more qualifying relationship. And that can be a major issue. So again, my first tip is to make sure to check with an experienced immigration lawyer before making any changes to the ownership structure of either the US company or the foreign company. Now, moving on to some more tips. These tips specifically apply to L-1 new office applicants. So just to provide some background information, there's something that's referred to as an L-1 new office, and there's a special type of L-1 which is referred to as an L-1 new office. It's for situations where the US company has been doing business for less than a year. And when somebody does an L-1 new office, or when somebody gets approved for an L-1 new office, the L-1 approval notice comes in for a period of 1 year. So basically, USCIS is approving this L-1 beneficiary for a 1-year duration to be able to justify the L-1 role. Let's assume that we're dealing with an L-1A manager or executive that's coming to the United States to establish a new office in a company in the US that's been operating for less than a year. Well, as an L-1A manager or executive, the manager or executive is required to primarily perform the duties of a manager or executive. But sometimes a US company, maybe again as a brand new company, there might not be a whole lot of operations going on that justify the need for a manager or executive. And what I mean by that is there may not be very many employees in the first year of operations. There may not be a whole lot of operations to justify the need for an executive. And USCIS understands this. So that's what the purpose is of this 1-year duration. The 1-year duration that's granted on an L-1A new office petition is to essentially allow this beneficiary that comes in on this visa to establish the need for their role and essentially grow the operations of the US business to create the need for their services as either a manager or executive. So with all that background information, this brings me to my next couple of tips. And these tips are that in this first year, it is imperative to essentially grow the revenue of the US company. In addition to growing the revenue of the US company, it's also imperative to grow the employee count of the US company. So these are two things that are very important, both growing the revenue and growing the number of employees. Now, this may not be technical requirements of you must have X amount of employees or you must have X amount of revenue to be approved for an L-1 renewal. We're not talking about statutory requirements, but when it comes time to renew your L-1 new office application or your L-1 new office petition, being able to show revenue and being able to show that you've hired a workforce and you've hired employees in the US makes it much easier and makes your ability to demonstrate the US company now has established the need for a manager or executive. It puts you in a position to establish that and make that argument much better than if you do not really have revenue or you do not have employees after that first year. So again, tip number 2 is that within that first year of operations, when you're on an L1 in a new office L1 petition, you're on an L1 visa establishing a new office, you should grow the revenue of that company within that first year and establish a workforce for that US company. And again, to reiterate, by doing so, you're going to give yourself a better chance of demonstrating to USCIS that your L1 petition should be renewed. In this video, we kind of covered a lot of information. To just revisit quickly once again, the first point that I mentioned was to be very careful about adjusting the ownership structure of either the foreign company or the US company, and to make sure that you consult with a qualified immigration lawyer before making any changes that could potentially disrupt whether there's a qualifying relationship in place. And the second tip was for L1 new offices, and it was to make sure to grow the revenue of the US company in that first year of operations and to hire a workforce for the US company, as it will make your ability to successfully apply for the L1 renewal easier if those two factors are in place. So I hope you found this video very helpful. If you know anybody that can benefit from this information, please feel free to share this video with them. As always, thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next video.